The call came at 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, and I remember the exact time because I had just checked my phone to see if my mother had responded to the text I'd sent her the night before. She hadn't. I was still staring at that unanswered message when the other call came in. My supervisor at the hospital telling me I needed to come in early, that there had been a scheduling conflict, that they needed me to cover a double shift starting in 40 minutes. I said yes before I even thought about it. That's what I always did. I said yes, I'll be there, I'll figure it out, don't worry about me. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed for a long moment. My daughter was still asleep down the hall. She was 4 years old, and she called my mother Grandma, with this particular kind of brightness in her voice, like the word itself was made of something good. I used to love hearing it. I'm not sure when I stopped. I should back up. My name is Thea, and I'm 31 years old, and for most of my adult life I have been what my family quietly referred to as the responsible one. What that actually meant was this: I was the one who paid. Not in some dramatic, resentful way, at least not at first. It started small, the way these things always do. My father had a rough patch when I was 22 and just starting my first real job as a registered nurse. My parents' mortgage was a month behind. My younger brother had just started college. It felt like the obvious thing to do. I helped. I covered 1 month, then another, then the college tuition, then the car payment when my brother's transmission died, then the utility bills when my parents said they were stretched thin. 8 years later, I was still covering all of it. I want to be honest about something. I didn't do this under protest. Not entirely. There was a version of me that genuinely believed this was love, that keeping my family financially stable was how I showed up for them, that one day they would look at me and understand what I had quietly been doing all those years. I was waiting for the acknowledgement. I think most people in my position are. We tell ourselves we're not keeping score, but somewhere underneath that, we're absolutely keeping score. And we're waiting to be seen. My brother, I'll call him what my daughter calls him, which is just uncle. He never worked a full year in his life. He started businesses that never launched. He moved back home at 25 and had been there since. My mother treated this like an endearing quirk, the way you'd describe a golden retriever who keeps chewing things. He's finding himself, she would say. He has so many ideas. Meanwhile, he drove a car I helped pay for, ate food bought with money I sent home every month, and called me maybe 3 times a year, on my birthday, on Christmas, and when he needed something. My daughter's father left before she was born. That's its own long story, and not one I'm telling today. What matters is that I was doing this alone. Nursing shifts, a 4-year-old, and a family that treated my bank account like a shared utility they hadn't signed up for, but had every right to access. The text I'd sent my mother the night before that Tuesday was simple. I was scheduled for a minor outpatient procedure the following Friday. Nothing life-threatening, but I would need anesthesia, and I would need someone to pick up my daughter from preschool and watch her for the afternoon while I recovered. I had asked my mother and father. I had given them 10 days' notice. I had explained it clearly and calmly and without drama. Her response came in while I was getting dressed for my shift. Thea, that Friday doesn't work for us. Your father and I already have plans. Can't you find someone else? I read it 3 times. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been awake and waiting. What plans? I asked. I wasn't angry yet. I was still in the phase where I thought there was a reasonable explanation. She hesitated. Your brother is having some people over. We're hosting, Abba, you're hosting a get-together at your house. The house I pay the mortgage on, instead of watching your granddaughter for 4 hours while I come out of anesthesia. You don't have to say it like that, Mom. It's a medical procedure. I just need someone to pick her up from school. Are we already committed to this, Thea? You always do this. You spring things on us and expect us to rearrange our whole lives. I had told her 10 days ago. I had put it in a text, which meant there was a timestamp. I looked at it while she was still talking. 10 days and 2 hours ago exactly. She said a few more things after that. Something about how I was always making her feel guilty. Something about how I needed to learn to make better arrangements. Something about how it wasn't fair to rely on them for childcare on short notice. I stopped tracking the words. I was watching them come through the phone like objects passing on a conveyor belt, identifiable but no longer meaningful. Okay, I said when she finished. Okay, you understand, or okay, you're upset. Okay, I heard you, I said. I'll figure it out. And then I got in my car and drove to work. The procedure was a laparoscopy. My doctor had found something on a scan a few weeks earlier that needed to be looked at more closely. She had told me it was likely benign, but that we needed to confirm. I had not told my parents this. I had kept it vague, because I didn't want to be dramatic about it. Didn't want them to feel obligated. Didn't want the sympathy that came with an asterisk. The kind of sympathy that made people feel good about themselves without actually requiring them to do anything. Looking back, I think I also knew, somewhere I wasn't examining too closely, that their response would be exactly what it was. I found a neighbor who could pick up my daughter. Her name is Lupe, and she is 63 years old, and has watched my daughter on 3 separate occasions, and charges me $30 an hour, and is worth every cent. I booked her for the afternoon, confirmed the procedure, and said nothing more to my parents. The Friday came. My father texted me at 8 in the morning. Not about the procedure, not to ask how I was doing, but to let me know the mortgage payment was going to be a few days late because they'd had some unexpected expenses that week. The unsuspected expenses, I would later find out, were the catering my mother had ordered for my brother's get-together. I was lying in a pre-op bay when I read that text. I had an IV in my arm and a hospital gown that kept sliding off one shoulder, and a nurse I didn't know asking me to rate my anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10. I looked at my father's text, then I looked at the ceiling. Then I typed back, "Okay, Dad, I'll take care of it," and I did. I took care of it from the pre-op bay, transferring money from my savings account on my phone while a surgical team prepped a room down the hall for me. Something happened in that moment that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't rage. Rage feels hot and sharp and clarifying. This was quieter than that. It was more like something settling. Like a decision that had been forming underground for years, finally broke the surface without any particular fanfare. I went into surgery. I came out of surgery. The results were benign, as my doctor had expected, and I cried in the recovery room not from relief but from the accumulated weight of everything I had been holding for a very long time alone in the efficient and quietly devastating way I had taught myself to hold things. Lupe brought my daughter to me that evening. My daughter ran to me and climbed into the hospital recliner I was sitting in and said, "Mommy, you smell funny." And I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. I didn't hear from my parents or my brother that day. Not a call, not a text, not a single word. 2 days later, my mother called about a different bill. A water heater replacement they hadn't budgeted for. Could I help? I let the call go to voicemail. I listened to the message twice. Then I called my grandfather. He is 77 years old and lives about 40 minutes from me, and is the person in my family I have trusted most for as long as I can remember. He was my mother's father, which means watching his daughter become the person she became was its own kind of quiet grief for him. Though he never said it in those words. He said it in other ways. The way he always asked about me specifically when he called. The way he remembered things I mentioned once, offhandedly, and asked about them months later. The way he showed up to my daughter's 2nd birthday with a handmade wooden toy he had built himself. With her name spelled out on it because he had taken up woodworking in retirement and wanted to make her something no one else would have. I told him everything. All of it. The mortgage, the 8 years, the procedure, the pre-op bay, my father's text about the catering money. I sat on my couch with a heating pad on my abdomen and talked for almost an hour, and my grandfather listened without interrupting, except to occasionally say, "Keep going," in the way he had, low and steady, like a hand on your back. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you told your mother any of this?" I said I hadn't. Not all of it. he said. "I'd like to say something to them if you'll let me. Not to fix anything, just, there are things that need to be said out loud." I told him yes. He called my parents and my brother, and arranged for us all to have dinner at his house the following Sunday. He told them it was about family finances, which was technically true and which was also the kind of framing that ensured they would actually show up. Because they always showed up when there was money being discussed. They showed up. I brought my daughter. She ran to my grandfather immediately, and he swept her up, and she giggled, and it was the most normal moment of the afternoon, those first 30 seconds before we all sat down. My grandfather didn't raise his voice. He never raises his voice. I have never once heard him shout in my life, and I think that's part of why what he said landed the way it did. He sat at the head of his table, and he looked at my mother, then my father, then my brother, and he laid out the numbers, not accusatorially, just clearly. 8 years of mortgage payments, the tuition, the car, the utilities, the approximate total, which he had apparently taken the time to calculate before we arrived. My mother started to say something and he held up one hand. Not harshly, just the way you redirect a child who's about to interrupt, he said. "Your daughter was under anesthesia 10 days ago. She transferred money to your account from a pre-op bay. I want you to sit with that for a moment before anyone says anything." The silence that followed was unlike any silence I've experienced before or since. My brother looked at the table. My father looked at his hands. My mother looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Something between shame and the beginning stages of an argument she hadn't fully assembled yet. My grandfather looked at me and said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for what you decide to do going forward." That was it. No ultimatums, no theatrics, no speech about what family should mean. Just those 2 sentences, spoken plainly, in a room where everyone suddenly understood exactly what they meant. On the drive home, my daughter fell asleep in her car seat before we were even out of my grandfather's neighborhood. I drove in silence for a while. The streetlights slid over the windshield in even intervals, and I thought about the version of myself that had started this. 22 years old, first real paycheck, feeling the particular flush of capability that comes with being able to help, and choosing to make it permanent without fully understanding what permanent meant. I thought about all the Sunday dinners where I had smiled and paid for the groceries, and asked about my brother's latest idea, and listened to my mother talk about the neighbors, and pretended that the math of my life was not what it was. I thought about how much energy that pretending had cost me, and how I had never once thought to charge that to anyone's account. When I got home, I put my daughter to bed, and then I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't send a long emotional text or call a family meeting or write a letter laying out my grievances. I just updated the automatic transfers that had been going out of my account every month for 8 years. One by one, I turned them off. The mortgage, the utilities, the monthly transfer I had labeled in my own accounting app with a kind of bleak pragmatism as family support. It took 11 minutes, then I closed my laptop and went to bed, and I slept better than I had in longer than I could remember. The calls started 4 days later. First my mother, twice in one morning, then my father, then my brother, which was notable because he rarely called about anything that wasn't directly about my brother. Then my mother again, a voicemail this time that I listened to once and did not return. A week after that, my mother showed up at my door. Not a text first, not a warning, just her car in my driveway on a Wednesday evening when I was in the middle of making dinner, and my daughter was watching something in the living room. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door mostly closed behind me. She looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. She looked like someone who had been running an argument in her head for a week and hadn't slept well doing it. She started to speak and I let her get through the first few sentences. Something about how this was a family matter and we should discuss it. Something about how the mortgage was due and she didn't know what I expected them to do. Before I said quietly that I had heard her, I heard you when you told me you were too busy to watch your granddaughter while I was in surgery, I said. I heard that, and I want you to know that I'm not angry. I'm not punishing you, I'm just done. She said, done with what? And I said, with carrying things that aren't mine to carry, she cried. I had expected this and had thought I would feel guilty. But I mostly felt clear. The particular clarity of someone who has made a decision and is standing on the right side of it, even when the right side is uncomfortable. I told her I loved her, I meant it. Love and exhaustion and the end of a long pattern can coexist in the same moment, I know that now. I gave her the name of a financial counselor I had looked up. I told her the mortgage company had hardship programs. I told her my brother was 30 years old. Then I went back inside and finished making dinner. My grandfather called that night. He had heard from my mother. He asked how I was. Okay, I said. Actually okay. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, good. My daughter was sitting across the table from me eating the noodles I'd made, humming something tuneless and swinging her feet the way she did when she was content. She looked up and caught me looking at her and smiled. That full, unself-conscious smile that children have before the world teaches them to hold anything back. I thought, this is what I was protecting all along. Not a set of financial transfers, not a family dynamic I'd been too tired to dismantle, not the approval I'd been waiting for since I was 22 years old. This, the noodles, the humming, the smile, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.